What if the reason you can't stop overthinking everything isn't anxiety, insecurity, or stress? What if that exhausting habit of replaying every conversation, analyzing every decision, and preparing for problems that haven't happened yet isn't weakness, but a sign that your mind is operating on a level of awareness most people never access? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will change how you see yourself. Overthinking doesn't mean you're broken or mentally unstable. Sometimes it means your brain developed an early warning system so sophisticated that it never learned how to turn off. There's a kind of suffering that doesn't show on the surface. Not the obvious panic attacks or visible breakdowns, but the invisible kind that keeps you awake at 3 in the morning, trapped in a mental courtroom where you're both the defendant and the prosecutor. It's the constant hum of your mind dissecting interactions from 6 hours ago, searching for the moment you said something wrong, looked strange, or didn't measure up. People think overthinking means you're indecisive or neurotic. They're missing something crucial. You don't replay conversations because you're insecure. You replay them because your mind is trying to solve an impossible equation, calculating variables that don't exist, searching for the version of yourself that finally gets it right. And here's the truth that nobody talks about. That thing you've been calling a weakness, that mental spiral you shame yourself for, it's actually your mind's way of protecting something the world tried to take from you: your ability to feel. The signs start small. So small you don't notice the pattern forming. You finish a conversation and immediately feel your chest tighten, not because anything bad happened, but because your mind is already scanning for mistakes. You catch yourself mentally rehearsing a simple email hours before sending it, rewriting sentences that don't need fixing, anticipating reactions to words you haven't even typed yet. You walk away from a normal interaction, but your mind stays behind, reviewing your tone, your facial expressions, wondering if that pause lasted too long or if your laugh sounded forced. You notice the exact moment someone's energy shifted, a micro-expression that flickered across their face for half a second, and suddenly you're building entire narratives about what it meant. Your body starts tracking threats your conscious mind doesn't register. Your shoulders creep up towards your ears without you noticing. Your jaw clenches during moments that should feel relaxed. Your breathing becomes shallow when you're simply sitting in a room with other people. Your nervous system is screaming what your mouth won't say. Something here doesn't feel safe, even when logically everything is fine. You replay conversations word for word, not because you're obsessive, but because you're trying to solve a puzzle that doesn't have pieces. Why did they say it that way? What did that tone mean? Did I come across wrong? Should I have said something different? Your brain treats social interactions like crime scenes, collecting evidence, searching for clues about where things went wrong or might go wrong next time. You rehearse future conversations before they happen, scripting responses to questions nobody has asked yet, preparing defenses for criticisms that may never come. You rewrite past interactions in your head, creating alternate versions where you were smoother, smarter, more confident, more normal. Not because you're obsessive, because you're trying to answer a question that haunts you constantly. Why do I feel this way when nothing's technically wrong? And quietly, without deciding it, you accept a story. Maybe if I think hard enough, plan well enough, analyze thoroughly enough, I can finally figure out how to exist without this constant noise in my head. But the more you think, the louder it gets. You retreat, not from people exactly, but from the discomfort of being spontaneous in a world that rewards quick reactions. You pull back from situations where you can't control the outcome, where you can't prepare, where you might be caught off guard. And slowly, almost without noticing, overthinking stops being something you do and becomes something you are. Your identity gets wrapped around it. The person who thinks too much, the person who can't just relax, the person whose mind never stops running scenarios, calculating risks, searching for the answer that will finally make the noise stop. But it never does, because you're not solving the wrong problem. You're trying to think your way out of a feeling that thinking created in the first place. This pattern didn't start yesterday. Most people trace it back to childhood, to moments that felt completely normal then, but shaped everything after. Maybe you were the kid who watched before joining in, the one who needed to understand the rules of a game before playing, who studied how other kids moved through the world so effortlessly while you needed a map, or the one who needed processing time while everyone else just blurted out answers, made decisions in seconds, jumped into situations without that voice in your head asking, "But what if this goes wrong?" A child in an unpredictable environment learns that constant vigilance keeps them safer than relaxation ever could. When you grow up not knowing if today will be calm or chaotic, if the adults around you will be warm or cold, if your needs will be met or dismissed, your brain does something brilliant. It starts predicting, it starts planning, it starts building detailed maps of every possible outcome because being caught off guard once was painful enough. Your overthinking wasn't a personality flaw, it was survival intelligence. A child who experienced criticism, rejection, or punishment for getting things wrong stops expecting grace and starts expecting judgment. So they begin checking their work twice, rehearsing their words, analyzing their behavior, trying desperately to anticipate the mistake before it happens. Because mistakes weren't just mistakes in your world, they were proof you weren't good enough, smart enough, careful enough. A child who was sensitive, observant, or simply wired to feel things more deeply began believing the world wasn't designed for minds that worked like theirs. While other kids seemed to glide through social situations, you were reading subtext, noticing tensions, feeling emotional temperatures that nobody else seemed to register. And when you tried to express what you felt, people looked at you like you were overcomplicating things. So you learned to keep it inside and process it alone. Psychologists call this hypervigilance conditioning. Your nervous system took those early experiences and built templates. Template 1, safety requires constant monitoring. Template 2, belonging means getting it exactly right. Template 3, expressing yourself freely is dangerous, so think first, speak later, and even then, question everything you said. Your brain didn't malfunction. It adapted brilliantly to an environment that couldn't hold you gently. It gave you a supercomputer that runs threat assessments in milliseconds, that spots problems before they fully form, that protects you by thinking 10 steps ahead. The problem is, it never learned the difference between actual danger and perceived danger. It treats a casual text message like a crisis, a normal conversation like a test you might fail, a simple decision like a fork in the road where one wrong turn destroys everything. Now you carry patterns you never chose, responding to echoes of threats that aren't even in the room anymore. Your childhood needed you to overthink to survive, but your adulthood keeps you overthinking even when you're safe, and nobody ever taught you how to tell your nervous system that the war is over. Here's what most people get wrong. They think overthinking means you're anxious, scattered, or can't focus. The opposite is true. You overthink because you're processing information at a level most people never reach. You're not broken, you're attuned. While others skim the surface of interactions, your mind is running deep scans, picking up data they don't even know exists. You sense when someone's words don't match their energy before they finish their sentence. You feel the shift in a room's atmosphere, that subtle change in tension or mood, seconds before it becomes obvious to everyone else. You read subtext like a language everyone else forgot they're speaking, catching the meaning beneath the meaning, the truth hiding under polite words, the emotion people are working hard not to show. This depth is your superpower and your isolation, because the more you sense, the unbearable surface-level existence becomes. Small talk feels like sandpaper on your brain, every scripted question and rehearsed answer grating against your need for something real. Social gatherings drain you in minutes when they energize others for hours, not because you're antisocial, but because you're absorbing every micro-tension, every unspoken conflict, every forced smile, processing emotional data that other people filter out automatically. Casual conversations feel like you're speaking two languages at once, the words you're saying out loud and the entire symphony of meaning you're hearing that nobody else seems to notice.
You're not overthinking because you can't handle life. You're overthinking because you handle far more of it than anyone realizes, including yourself. Most people walk into a room and see people talking. You walk into the same room and your system immediately catalogs who's uncomfortable, who's performing, who's genuinely present, who's checked out, where the power dynamics are, what's being said versus what's being felt. You're not choosing to do this. Your nervous system is doing it automatically, running constant diagnostics on your environment, on the people in it, on yourself within it. And that level of processing is exhausting. It's like everyone else is watching a movie while you're simultaneously watching the movie, reading the script, analyzing the cinematography, predicting the ending, and feeling every emotion the characters are trying to hide. You can't turn it off. You can't unsee what you see. You can't unfeel what you feel. So you retreat into your head, the only place where the volume of the world gets turned down, and you can finally think without interference. When you live with this long enough, something dangerous happens. You stop seeing yourself through clarity and start seeing yourself through shame. The world gives you ready-made explanations. You're too sensitive. You're overthinking again. You worry too much. You need to relax. You're making things complicated. You're being dramatic. And even though these labels don't capture the full picture, hearing them enough times begins to rewire how you see yourself. You start questioning your own reality. Why can't I just be normal like everyone else? Why does sending a simple text message feel like diffusing a bomb? Why do I need 3 days to recover from a social event that everyone else calls fun? What's wrong with the way my brain works? What's broken in me that I can't just let things go? You begin collecting evidence against yourself. Every moment you replay a conversation becomes proof you're obsessive. Every time you hesitate before speaking becomes proof you're insecure. Every decision you second-guess becomes proof you're indecisive. Every emotion you feel too deeply becomes proof you're too much. You take your sensitivity, your awareness, your depth, and you reframe them as flaws, as things that need fixing, as reasons you don't fit. And the more you doubt yourself, the harder overthinking becomes. The harder it gets, the more inadequate you feel. The more inadequate you feel, the more you overthink to compensate, trying to think your way into being someone who doesn't think so much. It's a cycle that convinces you the problem is you, not the environment you've been trying to survive. You start believing you're defective when actually you're just operating on a different frequency. But your overthinking isn't evidence of defect. It's evidence that you've been trying to fit a nervous system built for depth into a world optimized for speed. You've been trying to exist with a mind that processes in layers in a culture that rewards people who skim surfaces. You've been trying to be spontaneous when your entire system was trained to prepare, to predict, to protect. And instead of recognizing that the mismatch isn't your fault, you internalized it. You made it mean something about your worth. You turned your complexity into a character flaw. But what if the problem was never you? What if the problem is that nobody ever taught you that some minds are built to go deep, to process thoroughly, to feel intensely, and that this isn't something to fix, it's something to understand? The modern world takes this internal pattern and amplifies it in ways previous generations never faced. You're supposed to respond instantly, decide quickly, move efficiently, be productive, be optimized, be on all the time, constantly, effortlessly, without friction. But if you process deeply, these demands don't inspire, they suffocate. Every notification is a decision to make. Every message is a tone to decode. Every post is a performance to evaluate. The world runs on speed and your mind runs on depth, and there's no setting that lets you bridge that gap without exhausting yourself. Then there's the digital world, promising connection, delivering comparison. Your feed shows people who seem to make decisions without second-guessing, who post without agonizing over every word, who live spontaneously while you're still mentally rehearsing a conversation you might have next week. You watch people exist with an ease that feels impossible to you, saying exactly what they think, doing exactly what they want, moving through life without that constant internal committee meeting where every thought gets cross-examined before it's allowed to become action. You're not jealous of them, you're jealous of their ease. The ease of not carrying a courtroom in your head, the ease of not replaying every interaction like it's evidence in a trial, the ease of just being without the exhausting work of constantly becoming someone acceptable. Technology gives you connection without presence, interaction without intimacy.
visibility without belonging. You can talk to 100 people and still feel completely alone because none of them see the weight you're carrying. None of them know about the 3-hour spiral you had last night over something you said in a 5-minute conversation. None of them understand that what looks like silence on your end is actually a hurricane of thoughts you're trying to organize into something that won't sound as chaotic as it feels. The digital age made overthinking shareable, but not more understood. Now you get to watch everyone else's highlight reel while your blooper reel plays on loop in your mind, and the gap between how others seem to exist and how you actually exist grows wider every day. You're not failing. The game is rigged for people who process differently than you do, for people who can think fast instead of think deep, for people whose nervous systems weren't trained to treat every interaction like a puzzle that needs solving. You're trying to win at a game you can't win with speed because you're built for depth. Here's what changes everything. Overthinking doesn't mean you're mentally weak. It doesn't mean you're destined to be anxious forever. It doesn't mean you'll always be trapped in your head watching life instead of living it. It means you've been navigating a world that moves at a rhythm your nervous system was never taught to match. Your overthinking isn't malfunction, it's adaptation to an environment that couldn't meet you where you actually exist. Your mind learned to protect you the only way it knew how, by thinking ahead, planning for danger, trying to control outcomes in a world that felt unpredictable. That's not weakness, that's intelligence working overtime because it never learned that safety could exist without constant vigilance. You don't need to become someone else. You don't need to transform into the person who makes snap decisions, who speaks without thinking, who moves through the world with reckless confidence. You need to find spaces that don't require you to translate yourself to exist in them. Environments where depth isn't treated like a liability. People who don't rush your processing time. Situations where thinking things through is valued, not pathologized. Because belonging isn't created by forcing yourself into spaces that weren't built for how you work. Belonging is created when you stop abandoning yourself to fit into places that demand you shrink. Your healing doesn't require a personality transplant. It asks for small, gentle expansions. Say one thing you'd normally edit out. Not the big vulnerable confession, just the small, true thing you usually keep inside because you've already decided it's too much, too weird, too honest. Choose one small environment over one overwhelming one. Instead of the loud party where you'll spend 3 days recovering, choose the quiet coffee shop. Instead of the group hangout where you'll monitor yourself all night, choose the one-on-one conversation where you can actually breathe. Let someone see one layer deeper than usual, not your entire inner world, just one floor down from where you usually stop. Let them know you replayed that conversation. Let them know you're feeling more than you're showing. Let them know you need a minute to process before responding. Not to fix yourself, to let yourself exist in conditions that actually support how you're wired. You've spent years trying to speed up, trying to think less, trying to be lighter, simpler, easier. What if instead you found people and places that could slow down enough to meet you? Your overthinking isn't the enemy. The environment that made you feel like you had to think your way to safety is. And you can't think your way out of that. You can only give yourself permission to exist differently than you've been told you should. You're not broken. You're not too much. You're not the problem everyone's been telling you that you are. You're a deep processor in a shallow processing world, and that's not a flaw to fix. It's a frequency to honor. The people who are meant for you won't ask you to think less. They'll give you the space to think fully and still choose to stay. If this resonated, there's more to this story. Many people who overthink everything also find themselves retreating into solitude, avoiding social situations, choosing home over going out, not because they're antisocial, but because their mind finally gets quiet in spaces where they don't have to perform. If you want to understand why that happens, watch The Psychology of People Who Love Staying at Home. It completes the picture you've started uncovering today. Share your experience in the comments. You don't have to explain everything. Just let someone know they're not as alone as they think. You never know who needs to hear that they're not as alone as they think. Subscribe if you want a corner of the internet where overthinkers, deep feelers, and people who process life in layers are finally understood. Where your complexity isn't treated like a problem to solve. The world made you feel like your mind was too much, but you belong here.